this side chapel, where the other tombs lie, is dedicated to St Anne, the mother of the Virgin Mary.
Greetings and welcome back to another British Guy Reacts video, and as you can probably see, I'm not in my usual surroundings, but in today's video I'm going to be showing you Farleigh's Castle in Somerset back in the 1300s. So if you like reaction videos, mainly covering things about the US, although today it's about British stuff, then don't forget to subscribe with the notification bell on, because I am posting every day at 2 PM Eastern. And if you'd like to support the channel even more, we do have a join and members section. Check out the link in the pinned comments for all the fun packed perks. Now listen to my jibber jabber, let's get on with it.
Welcome to Farleigh Hungerford Castle, home to the Hungerford family for nearly 300 years. The Hungerfords were a powerful and proud family. Amongst them was the first Speaker of the House of Commons, a treasurer to the King, and several soldiers. Their status led them to the centre of the great political and religious events of their time. We will hear about the Wars of the Roses, the Reformation, and the Civil War during our tour today. And what you will discover is that in the past, choosing the wrong side didn't just mean losing a job, bankruptcy, or prison, as it might today. It could lead to execution. But the Hungerfords were also colourful characters, and there are cases of murders, adultery, and imprisonments in their history. We will tell you these grisly and fascinating stories as we tour the castle.
This gatehouse, the main entrance to the castle, you'll see two carved stones. Above the window is the Hungerford coat of arms and crest, and below is the worn symbol of a sickle, the family device. You'll see these again later in the tour. Look out for them as you walk around. There was once a drawbridge here, as you might expect in a castle. If you look to the top of the arch, on the sides, you may be able to make out the two small square holes where the chains that lifted the bridge used to be. The drawbridge is one of many defensive features visible from here. To your left, there's an outer curtain wall with towers, which is protected with an outer ditch. The castle and its defences were built to show the status and power of the Hungerford family, and it may be that the symbolism of this building was more important to them than its strength as a fortification.
Let's go through the gate now to our next stop. castle was begun by Sir Thomas Hungerford, and we will hear more about him at our next stop. I want to explain the layout of the castle to you before we go further. Thomas Hungerford bought a manor house that was on this site in 1369 and fortified it as a castle around 1380. We will see what remains of the castle in a moment. Thomas's son, Walter, became as powerful as his father. He was Treasurer of England under King Henry VI. He also fought at the Battle of Agincourt against the French and was made the first Baron Hungerford in 1426. Walter extended his father's castle and built this large courtyard, or outer bailey, where we're standing now. Look around you. This area was created to increase the size and grandeur of Farleigh Hungerford Castle, as befitted its powerful owner. Around the walls there would have been stables and outhouses. The building of this courtyard brought more land into the castle. Interestingly, it also brought the parish church of St. Leonard within its walls. Thomas Hungerford had been buried there, and his final resting place was now inside his son's own castle.
Successive generations of Hungerfords made further changes to the castle, and we'll hear about some of these later in the tour. On the panel, you can see a picture of the castle in 1640, after new windows had been inserted and the interior decorated. Let's go now to the oldest part of the castle, the part built by Thomas Hungerford. To get there, you need to cross the small wooden footbridge nearby. This was probably the site of the original manor house that Thomas Hungerford bought in 1369. He was the first ever Speaker of the House of Commons, and a powerful man in his day. He fortified his manor house without permission from the king, and had to pay a token fine of 1 mark in 1383 for the misdemeanor.
So let's see if we can identify Thomas's original castle from the evidence that remains today. Stand now with your back to the little bridge that you just crossed. To your left, you should see the remains of a tall tower, the tallest remaining part of the castle. If you look to your right, there is another tower, although less of this one survives. Another 2 towers would have stood in front of you, one to the right and one to the left, and formed the 4 corners of Thomas's castle. They were joined together by a high stone wall to form a rectangular compound.
The bridge you came over is on the site of an original bridge over a dry moat. Visitors to the castle would have entered over this and then passed between 2 grand gatehouse towers. Just behind you, on either side of the bridge, are some remains of stone walls, shaped in plan like the letter D. These are the remains of the gatehouse towers.
Stand again with the bridge behind you and imagine the walled compound before you. This was called the inner court, and all the domestic buildings stood inside it. When Thomas built his castle, he created new accommodation for his family, guests, and servants. This area would have been bustling with activity. Servants would have hurried through on their daily business, and the friends and family of the Hungerfords would have gathered here to go hunting or hawking. The Hungerford family used the castle as a country home for nearly 3 centuries. The illustration on the panel shows a hawking party assembling in the courtyard. Unfortunately, one of the later Hungerfords, Sir Edward, enjoyed entertaining his friends so much that his lavish lifestyle was his downfall. He became known as Sir Edward the Spendthrift, squandering his fortune and getting so far into debt that he had to sell the castle in 1686. This is the site of the Great, where the family and their guests dined on formal occasions. The illustration on the sign here shows a banquet in progress in the hall around 1600. If we had been standing here then, we would have been in the undercroft and would have had to climb a staircase to enter the hall. The Great Hall was in the centre of a range of buildings. Beyond the hall from where we're standing, and stretching from left to right, were magnificent chambers for the family's use, which Walter had added to his father's original building. Behind you were the kitchens, which we will see later.
It was once the custom for the entire household to eat together in the hall, but by the late 15th century, the family would have eaten in the adjoining private chamber. They probably only ate here when they had important guests or on special occasions such as Christmas, when jugglers and musicians would have been brought in to entertain the visitors. There was a strict seating protocol on these occasions. The family and important guests sat on the dais, a raised platform at the top end of the hall. Tables then ran the length of the hall, with guests seated according to their status. The most important sat at the top, and the least important at the bottom. The hall was clearly built to impress visitors. Many of the Hungerfords who lived here decorated its walls to make it grander, and it definitely left an impression. It's known at one time to have been decorated with heraldry and knights on horseback. It must have looked splendid.
standing facing the panel titled Food and Drink. We are now in the kitchen complex of the castle. The kitchen itself would have been to your right, running towards the Great Hall. It had two enormous fireplaces where meat was roasted. The scullery, where all the washing up was done, was located just beyond the kitchens, and to its left was the well. This provided the water supply for the kitchens and the entire castle. To your left, directly up against the wall of the castle, was the bakehouse, where bread was made. There was a big fireplace in there and two ovens. I'll tell you a story about these ovens in a moment. Beyond the bakehouse, running along the rest of the wall, was a pleasure garden with flowers to delight the family and their guests. You can imagine fragrant fruit trees growing up against the castle wall, their fruit ripening against the warm stone.
Cooking for the household would have been a hot and tiring business.
My job was to help roast the meat in the two huge fireplaces at the castle. The meat was hung on a metal spit over the fire, and I had to turn it to make sure that the meat was thoroughly cooked. This meant standing very close to the fire, and the heat was unbearable at times. I was given extra ale to quench my thirst. Food was prepared in the kitchens and rushed upstairs as quickly as possible so that it didn't get too cold.
Now let me tell you a gruesome story about the ovens. In 1516, Edward Hungerford inherited the castle, but he went away for several years to fight the French. Whilst he was away, Agnes, the wife of his steward, plotted to become his next wife. With two accomplices, she murdered her husband, John, in the castle.
I worked in Sir Edward's household, and during the summer of 1518 was party to the servants' whispers about a terrible murder. Agnes Cottle plotted with two accomplices to kill her husband, John Cottle. He was strangled with a neckerchief by William Matthew and William Ignis, yeomen of Heytesbury, here at the castle on 26th of July 1518. When they'd murdered him, they burnt his body in the castle's ovens. By the end of the year, Agnes had married Sir Edward. Once safely married, Lady Agnes was protected, and she in turn protected her henchmen. When Sir Edward died in 1522, he left everything to her, but she didn't get away with it. Lady Hungerford, Matthew and Ignis were tried and found guilty once Sir Edward could protect them no longer. They were all hanged at Tyburn, and we're glad to be rid of the evil woman. The castle then came back to Walter, Sir Edward's son.
Let's go to our next stop now and hear about another unfortunate Hungerford wife. Her story is connected with the tall tower that stands nearby. Let's make our way there now, where you will find a panel called the Lady Tower.
You'll remember Agnes, who burnt her first husband in the castle ovens. Well, her stepson Walter also had an extraordinary relationship with his wife. He had 3 wives, actually, but this story relates to the third, called Elizabeth. She's popularly believed to have been held in this tower when Walter imprisoned her in Farleigh Hungerford for several years, and it's been known as the Lady Tower in her memory ever since.
The poor Lady Elizabeth is imprisoned still in the castle tower. It's been many years now that we've not seen her about the village, but she is alive still. Sir Walter is known to be mad and to be trying to poison her. Her only sustenance is provided by his servants, and she doesn't dare to eat or drink it. But we have found a way to sustain her. Under cover of night, we bring the lady food and drink unbeknownst to her husband. We're not wealthy people, but the Lady Elizabeth is dearly loved, and we would not see her starve.
Look at the tower now. Can you see that there are windows, doors, latrines and fireplaces suspended at different levels? This is because there were originally 4 floors to this tower. You may be able to work out where the original floors, doors and latrines used to be. The cutaway diagram on the panel shows you how it might have looked when all these features were in place. This tower was still in one piece until bonfire night in 1842. Unfortunately, the ivy that was covering it was set alight by careless children, and part of the outside wall fell down, leaving it as you see it today.
So what happened to Walter Hungerford? Well, he came to a sticky end. He was a supporter of the powerful chief minister of King Henry VIII called Thomas Cromwell. When Cromwell was accused of high treason, Henry had him beheaded, and Walter Hungerford along with him. For the second time in their history, the Hungerfords had chosen the wrong side and were severely punished. Not only was Walter executed, but the castle was taken away by Henry VIII, and the Hungerford family lost the title of Baron forever.
King Henry VIII executed somebody else who had a connection with this castle, Margaret Plantagenet, Countess of Salisbury. She was born here at Farleigh in 1473 and was the mother of Cardinal Reginald Pole. He sided with the Pope against the king over his divorce from Catherine of Aragon. Margaret's execution was ordered even though there was no clear reason for it. She was nearly 70 when she was led onto the scaffold in 1541 and faced a young boy of an executioner who was not very expert. 150 people watched as he hacked her head and shoulders to pieces before she was finally pronounced dead.
You should now be standing outside the priest's house. Inside the priest's house, there is an exhibition about the history of the castle. But before you go in, let me tell you a little about the house's history. In 1430, Walter appointed John Grody as chantry chaplain at the parish church of Farleigh Hungerford. He was responsible for offering divine service for the benefit of the living and dead members of the Hungerford family. The priest's house was built as a house for him and his successors to the post. When Sir Walter extended the castle between 1441 and 1443, the parish church was absorbed within the outer bailey. It became the family chapel, and a second chaplain was appointed to live here.
After King Henry VIII had confiscated the castle from the Hungerfords, the family managed to buy it back from Queen Mary I in 1554. By the 17th century, the castle was in the hands of Sir Edward Hungerford, who, unlike his ancestors, was a model husband and citizen. But his nephew, who inherited Farleigh Hungerford, squandered his inheritance by enjoying an extravagant life at the court of King Charles II. He was nicknamed the Spendthrift and wasted so much money that in 1686 he had to sell the castle to pay off his debts. Following the Reformation, the house became a farm. A new range was added to the building, and in 1686, the priest's house was described as a dairy. By 1701, except for this building, the castle was in ruins. Although our tour doesn't include the exhibition in the priest's house, do feel free to stop the tour and visit it if you wish. When you're ready, follow the signs to the chapel, our next stop. now be standing outside the chapel. Let's go inside now. Stand now where you can get a good view of its interior. In a moment, we'll be seeing some of its treasures. There are medieval wall paintings here that have survived for 600 years, and ornate tombs of the Hungerford family. But for now, just soak up its wonderful atmosphere. This is perhaps the highlight of Farleigh Hungerford Castle.
This church was once the village parish church, but when the first Baron Walter built the outer courtyard of the castle in the 15th century, his new walls surrounded this building and it became part of the castle. He built a new parish church for the villagers half a mile to the south in 1443. This chapel is now the final resting place for several generations of the Hungerford family, but not those that were executed. Let's go now and see some of their tombs. Facing the large stained glass window, walk towards the altar and stop by the side of a tomb on your left, surrounded by metal railings.
This is our next stop. When you get there, point your player at the activation point.
This magnificent tomb is where Sir Thomas Hungerford, the man who began the building of the castle around 1380, is buried. His wife Joanna lies beside him. If you look carefully at Thomas's feet, you'll see they rest on a lion. Thomas is in a suit of armour and Joanna is wearing a heavy headdress. Their son, Walter, the first Baron, put up the railings around the tomb. It was Walter also who was left with the task of enacting his mother's last request.
If you'd like to hear what it was, then please press A. This side chapel, where the other tombs lie, is dedicated to St. Anne, the mother of the Virgin Mary.